In Ravensmere, every dance announced a rank, an alliance, or a promise. Mrs. Eliza Bellamy understood that rule better than most, because she taught young women how to cross a crowded floor without losing themselves. The Duke of Ravensmere had no patience for such ideas. He trusted contracts, consequences, and silence. Love, he believed, was only disorder given a noble name. Yet when the county expected him to choose the woman who could secure his family's future, he turned instead to the widowed dancing instructor everyone had been told to overlook. Eliza knew one dance could cost her pupils, her good name, and the modest life she had rebuilt. She also knew refusal would let others decide what sort of woman she was. So when the ruthless Duke offered his hand, she faced a choice more dangerous than scandal. Would she protect the life she had made, or step forward before the whole room and claim it? The morning lesson had reached its hardest figure when the Duke of Ravensmere entered Bellamy's academy without sending word. 12 young women stopped in the middle of the floor, slippers scraped against polished boards. A violin note died beneath Mr. Pierce's bow, leaving the room quiet enough for Eliza to hear rain against the high windows. The Duke stood inside the door in a dark riding coat. Water marked his shoulders, but his face showed no concern for weather, music, or startled pupils. Eliza asked Mr. Pierce to begin the figure again. Then she led Ravensmere into her small office. The lesson resumed behind them with nervous counting and the soft beat of shoes. The Duke placed a sealed packet on her desk. His sister, Lady Margaret Vale, would attend the county assembly in 6 days. Margaret had dismissed 3 instructors and claimed illness whenever dancing was mentioned. Ravensmere offered twice Eliza's usual fee for private lessons at his house. She would enter by a side door, so the arrangement remained unknown. Eliza looked at the packet without touching it. She had rebuilt the academy after her husband's death, beginning with 6 pupils and a roof that leaked over the musicians' gallery. The money could replace the warped shutters before winter. It also carried a message she knew too well. Her skill was welcome, provided she remained unseen. "I teach women to take their place, Your Grace. I will not take mine through a servant's door," Eliza said. The Duke asked whether she would deny Margaret help because of an entrance. Eliza returned the packet. She would teach Margaret under 3 conditions. Margaret must request the lessons herself. Eliza would use the front door. No one would call the arrangement a secret. Ravensmere studied her with cool attention. Eliza expected anger. Men with less power had shown more of it when she denied them a convenience. "Your terms are inconvenient, Mrs. Bellamy, but they are clear," Gideon said. He asked whether she could attend Ravensmere House that afternoon. Eliza agreed, provided Margaret still wanted the lesson after meeting her. Before leaving, Gideon looked through the half-open office door. A pupil had lost the figure and stood close to tears while her partner whispered impatient directions. Eliza returned to the floor, repeated the count softly, and allowed the girl to begin again without calling attention to her mistake. When Eliza glanced toward the entrance, Gideon was still watching. He left only after the pupil's shoulders settled. That afternoon, Eliza's hired carriage climbed the road to Ravensmere House beneath cold autumn light. A footman received her at the main door. The detail mattered more than she wished it did. Lady Margaret waited in the music room with her brother. She was 19, pale, and twisting a handkerchief between her fingers. Gideon explained that Margaret had agreed to one meeting. "I agreed because you promised not to command me to dance," Margaret said. The quiet correction revealed more courage than her frightened face suggested. Eliza asked Gideon to sit by the windows while she spoke with Margaret. Margaret knew the steps. Her fear began when anyone watched. At her first London ball, an older gentleman had laughed after she turned the wrong way. Since then, every crowded room seemed to wait for another mistake. Eliza did not promise that no one would notice her. She asked Margaret to walk across the room without music. Then she asked her to return. They repeated the path until Margaret stopped looking toward her brother. Gideon rose when Eliza began a simple count. His attention fixed upon Margaret with such force that she missed the next step. "Do not mistake obedience for ease, Your Grace," Eliza said. His mouth tightened, but he moved back and turned partly toward the window. Margaret crossed the room again. A second attempt became a turn. A third became 8 measured steps with Eliza beside her. By the end of the lesson, Margaret had not danced, but she had moved without twisting her handkerchief. Gideon's posture eased. He asked whether Margaret wished Eliza to return. "I should like Mrs. Bellamy to teach me, and I should like her at the assembly," Margaret said. Before Eliza could answer, the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmere entered. Lady Agnes Vale was silver-haired and composed enough to make the room feel colder. She greeted Eliza correctly, then reminded Margaret that invitations required family agreement. Margaret lowered her eyes. Gideon asked whether Eliza had another engagement. She had none. Her pupils would attend with their families, but teachers were seldom invited to display the results of their own work. Eliza accepted Margaret's invitation. Lady Agnes then reminded Gideon that the opening dance had been discussed with Lord Whitcomb. Lady Clara Harrow expected his hand. The meaning was plain. His first partner would confirm an alliance and perhaps a marriage that the county already considered settled. Gideon replied that he had made no formal promise to Clara. His mother answered that formal promises were not the only promises a gentleman could create. Eliza gathered her gloves. She had no wish to stand inside a family dispute or become its subject. At the door, Margaret thanked her for beginning without music. "You made the room feel smaller than my fear," Margaret said. Eliza promised to return the next day. Gideon walked her to the front steps. The air smelled of wet leaves and stone. He told her that his mother's remarks should not affect her attendance. Eliza asked whether Clara expected to become his wife. Gideon replied that expectation was not an agreement. She told him women often paid dearly for distinctions men considered exact. For the first time, something close to amusement touched his face. During the next 5 days, Margaret learned in careful stages. She crossed the room, turned, and completed a country figure with Eliza and one patient maid. Gideon attended only when invited. Twice, Eliza saw him begin to correct his sister and stop himself. He was difficult to ignore. He listened without appearing gentle and remembered every condition Eliza set. When Margaret asked for a slower count, he changed the musician's instructions rather than ordering her to become braver. Eliza did not mistake discipline for kindness, yet she began to see that his severity was not empty. Gideon wanted every problem solved because unsolved problems frightened him. On the evening of the assembly, Lornbridge's rooms shone with candlelight reflected in tall mirrors. Heat gathered beneath the musicians' gallery, silk skirts brushed polished boards, and conversation moved through the room like wind through dry leaves. Eliza wore a dark blue gown from her married years. She had altered the sleeves and removed the heavy trim her husband once preferred. The result was simple and entirely her own. Margaret arrived on Gideon's arm. She looked pale, but she did not look toward the door. Lady Clara Harrow stood near the center of the room in silver silk. Beside her, Lord Whitcomb spoke to Gideon with the confidence of a man reminding another of a settled duty. Eliza remained near her pupils and their families. Several greeted her warmly. One mother looked from Eliza to Gideon and turned away. The musicians lifted their bows. Whitcomb moved Clara forward. Gideon did not take her hand. A hush spread before any words were spoken. Clara held her expression, though color rose beneath her skin. Whitcomb's gaze hardened. Gideon crossed the floor and stopped before Eliza. The room seemed to lean closer. "Mrs. Bellamy, will you honor me with the opening dance?" Gideon said. Eliza understood what acceptance might cost. Families could withdraw their daughters. Whitcomb would call it an insult. Clara would receive public pity, though she had done nothing to deserve it. Gideon's choice might be courage, anger, or rebellion. Refusal carried a cost as well. It would allow Whitcomb to treat her as a servant who had forgotten her place. Gideon would remain the only person permitted to make a dangerous choice. Eliza looked at Clara. The younger woman's hands had tightened around her fan. Eliza wished there were a path that protected every woman in the room. There was none. "Yes, Your Grace." "But I am dancing for myself," Eliza said. Gideon offered his hand. The first notes began. He led too firmly, as if determination could protect them from every watching eye. Eliza resisted with the smallest turn of her wrist. For one step, he seemed ready to insist. Then his grip eased. They entered the figure together. Eliza felt the warmth of his hand through her glove and heard the measured rise of violins. When the dance required them to separate, his gaze remained on her. When it brought them together, he waited half a beat for her movement before completing his own. By the final turn, the room no longer seemed to contain a duke and an instructor. It contained two people who had made a public choice and could not know its price. The music ended. Gideon bowed, and Eliza curtsied. Conversation returned in a rush. Lord Whitcomb left before the next dance began. Near midnight, Gideon received a folded note from Whitcomb's steward. Whitcomb's contribution to the River Lorne Bridge was suspended at once. Gideon read the message and looked across the crowded room toward Eliza. She was helping Margaret prepare for another dance. Neither woman yet knew what the opening figure had cost. By noon the following day, 5 families had withdrawn their daughters from Bellamy's academy. The first note arrived before breakfast. It was polite, brief, and colder than any insult. Mrs. Hale explained that her husband disliked public uncertainty and wished their daughters' lessons to end at once. 2 more notes followed before the morning class. By the time the final pupil left, Eliza had received 2 servants carrying the same message in different words. The academy felt larger after the girls were gone. Their laughter had once filled the long room and softened the sound of rain against the windows. Now Eliza heard every creak of the floorboards and every drop that struck the sill. Mrs. Denby arrived just before 2 o'clock with her daughter beside her. Miss Denby had studied with Eliza for 3 years and had never missed a lesson without sending an apology. The girl kept her eyes on the floor while her mother explained that no respectable family could ignore the attention surrounding the opening dance. Eliza listened without interruption. She returned the unused portion of the term fee and placed the coins in Mrs. Denby's hand. "There was no deception in my conduct, Mrs. Denby, and I will not teach your daughter under a cloud of suspicion," Eliza said. Mrs. Denby flushed. She said she had meant no personal accusation, but the county spoke quickly and remembered slowly. She led her daughter away before the girl could offer a farewell. Eliza remained in the office until the outer door closed. The returned fee had taken nearly half the money reserved for winter coal. She opened her account book and began reducing every expense that could wait. New candles could be delayed. The musicians could rehearse less often. The warped shutters would remain through another season. Gideon arrived while she was still calculating. He carried no sealed packet this time. He had changed from formal black to a plain dark coat, but his presence still seemed to narrow the room. He asked how many pupils had left. Eliza told him 5. His jaw tightened. He said he would replace every lost fee and provide enough to keep the academy secure until public interest changed. "You cannot pay the world to respect me," Eliza said. Gideon answered that money could at least prevent other people's poor judgment from damaging her livelihood. Eliza closed the account book. The offer was practical, generous, and entirely wrong. If she accepted, the county would say she had gained exactly what it suspected she wanted. More important, she would have exchanged independent work for the private favor of a duke. "I will not become your dependent because you made me visible," Eliza said. The words struck him. Gideon did not defend himself at once. He looked toward the empty floor beyond the office, where the last traces of chalk still marked the mourning figure. He asked what she would accept. Eliza said she would approve a public statement if she wrote it herself. It would say that the dance had been offered and accepted freely, that no courtship had been announced, and that her work with Lady Margaret remained professional. Gideon agreed, though he warned that Lord Whitcomb might interpret any statement as a challenge. Eliza replied that silence had already allowed others to speak for her. She would not surrender the truth merely because a powerful man disliked hearing it. Before Gideon left, Margaret's carriage stopped outside. The young woman entered alone except for her maid, and announced that she intended to continue her lessons. She had heard what several families were saying, and refused to let fear make another decision for her. Eliza felt a quiet pride that had nothing to do with dukes or assemblies. Margaret removed her gloves, walked to the center of the floor, and asked to begin with the figure she had completed the previous evening. The lesson lasted until rain thickened against the windows. By the time it ended, the road toward Ravensmere had flooded near the lower meadow. Gideon's carriage could not return for another hour. Eliza expected him to wait in the office. Instead, he followed Margaret and her maid into the kitchen, where Eliza served bread, cheese, apples, and tea. Margaret ate quickly, then left with her maid to examine the academy's old costume cupboard. Gideon remained at the scrubbed wooden table. Without ceremony, Eliza placed a stack of loose music sheets between them and began rolling them for storage. He watched for a moment, then attempted to help. His first roll was too tight. The paper sprang open as soon as he released it. Eliza laughed before she could prevent herself. Gideon looked offended for half a second. Then the corner of his mouth moved. "I have managed estates with less resistance than this paper," Gideon said. The second attempt was no better. Eliza showed him how to loosen his grip and guide the sheet rather than force it. The task was simple, but he gave it the attention of a treaty. The room grew warmer from the small stove. Rain softened the world beyond the glass, and the ordinary sounds of the kitchen made Gideon seem less like the man who had crossed a crowded floor before the entire county. Eliza asked whether he had always disliked dancing. He said he did not dislike dancing. He disliked what people attached to it. His mother spoke of dances as promises. Whitcomb treated them as contracts. His parents had used music, gifts, and public affection after every quarrel, as though beauty could erase harm. "I do not hate music. I hate what people call love when they mean surrender," Gideon said. Eliza stopped rolling the paper. The admission did not ask for pity. He spoke as if identifying a flaw in a building, something dangerous because others refused to name it. She told him her husband had loved the idea of being generous. He had bought her fine gowns, corrected her speech, and introduced her as a gentleman's wife. He had never introduced her as a dancing master's daughter. Each gift had made her life more comfortable and herself less visible. Gideon asked whether she had loved him. Eliza considered the question. She had loved the hope of being fully known. She had also mistaken endurance for loyalty, because admitting disappointment felt like failure. "I learned that comfort can become a very quiet cage," Eliza said. Gideon set down the music sheet. His expression had lost its usual certainty. He said he did not want Eliza to feel caged by his attention. She answered that intention mattered, but conduct mattered more. Margaret returned before either could say anything else. The flooded road had begun to clear, and the carriage arrived soon after. Gideon left with no promise beyond the statement Eliza would prepare. For the first time since the assembly, Eliza watched him go without wishing the distance greater. That evening, Gideon met Lord Whitcomb in the Ravensmere library. Whitcomb did not sit. He stood before the unlit fire with his gloves in one hand and the posture of a man who believed courtesy was already a concession. He began by expressing concern for Clara. She had endured public embarrassment with admirable calm. The county now expected Gideon either to correct the misunderstanding or confirm that he had deliberately insulted the Harrow family. Gideon replied that he had intended no insult to Clara. He had asked Eliza to dance because he wished to dance with her. Whitcomb said desire was a poor guide for men responsible for land, workers, and family names. He reminded Gideon that the bridge required both estates. Stone had already been ordered. Men had left other work on the understanding that wages would continue through winter. Gideon knew each fact. He also knew Whitcomb had tied the project to an expectation neither Clara nor Gideon had formally accepted. Whitcomb offered a simple remedy. Gideon would resume his public attention to Clara. Mrs. Bellamy would issue a statement describing the dance as a courtesy requested for Margaret's comfort. The bridge funds would be released the next morning. "I will not apologize for asking the woman I wish to dance with," Gideon said. Whitcomb's face hardened. He asked whether a dancing instructor was worth 2 villages losing safe passage and 50 men losing winter wages. The question was meant to turn Eliza into the cause of Whitcomb's decision. Gideon refused the argument, but the cost remained real. Whitcomb left without another word. Gideon summoned his steward. Half the bridge laborers would have to be released until replacement funds could be found. The steward advised him to tell Eliza before rumors reached her. Gideon looked toward the rain-dark windows. Eliza had already lost pupils because of his choice. He would not place 50 dismissed men upon her conscience as well. "Mrs. Bellamy is not to hear of this until I have another plan," Gideon said. The steward hesitated, then bowed. 2 days later, Eliza traveled toward Ravensmere House for Margaret's lesson. Near the river, her carriage slowed beside a line of men carrying tools away from the unfinished bridge. One of them was the father of a pupil who had remained at her academy. He removed his cap when he saw her and said the Duke had dismissed half the crew. Eliza looked beyond him at the silent cranes, the stacked stone, and the empty worksheds. Gideon had defended her name. He had also hidden the price. Eliza ordered the driver to stop beside the unfinished bridge. Rain had turned the road to dark mud. Beyond the hedges, the River Lorne moved high and fast beneath a pale sky. Stone blocks waited beside the bank, covered with canvas. The wooden cranes stood still, their ropes knocking softly against the frames. Several men were carrying tools toward the village. They walked with the slow anger of men who had received bad news without the power to change it. Eliza stepped down before the driver could offer his hand. Cold water entered the edge of one shoe, but she hardly noticed. The laborer who had spoken to her removed his cap again. He explained that half the men had been dismissed 2 mornings earlier. The Duke's steward had promised that the work might resume, but no date had been given. Most of the men had expected wages through winter. Some had already refused other employment. Eliza thanked him and asked the driver to take her directly to Ravensmere House. Gideon was in the estate office when she arrived. Maps covered the central table. Bridge accounts lay open beside a list of names and weekly wages. He looked up as Eliza entered, and his expression told her that he understood at once. She placed her wet gloves upon the table. "You knew the men had been dismissed," Eliza said. Gideon dismissed the clerk and closed the door. He explained that Whitcomb had suspended his share of the project. Gideon had already contacted 2 bankers and 3 neighboring landowners, but replacement funds would take time. Eliza asked why he had not told her. He answered that the bridge was his responsibility. The dance had been his choice, and he would not place its consequences upon her. The explanation was calm. It might even have sounded honorable if Eliza had not heard the same reasoning in another man's voice years before. Her husband had often concealed difficulties until he had decided how she should feel about them. "I will not be the secret cost of your courage," Eliza said. Gideon's face changed. The words reached a place that anger could not. He said he had wanted to protect her from another burden. Eliza replied that protection without truth left her powerless. She had defended the dance publicly while families whispered that she had gained from it. Meanwhile, workers had lost wages, and she had been kept ignorant because Gideon believed ignorance would be kinder. He looked toward the list of names. "I was wrong to keep it from you," Gideon said. The admission came without excuse. Eliza had expected resistance and found herself less prepared for honesty. She moved closer to the table. The accounts were simple enough to follow. Whitcomb had promised half the stone cost and nearly a third of the winter wages. Gideon could cover part of the loss from estate reserves, but doing so at once would delay repairs to 2 tenant roofs and the village mill. Eliza asked whether local businesses had been invited to contribute. Gideon said the bridge was a landowner's project. Merchants had not been expected to pay for it. She pointed out that merchants used the road, as did the coaching inn, ferry families, millers, and farmers who carried produce to market. A smaller bridge section could be completed first. Work might continue with fewer men rather than stop entirely. Gideon listened. He asked questions about subscriptions, public meetings, and whether local families would give money to a project already associated with scandal. Eliza said they might give if the bridge ceased to look like a private bargain between two noble houses. The plan would not replace Whitcomb's full contribution, but it could preserve the foundations and keep some wages moving until spring. "You are proposing that I ask shopkeepers to repair a failure between gentlemen," Gideon said. Eliza met his gaze. "I am proposing that you let the people who need the bridge help decide how it is built," Eliza said. For several moments, only the river could be heard through the windows. Gideon agreed to call a public meeting within 3 weeks. He would open the accounts and state the exact shortage. Eliza would help explain the subscription plan, but only if she chose to place her name upon it. He then promised that no offer involving her work or reputation would be made without her approval. Eliza did not call the matter repaired. One honest conversation could not undo his decision. Yet as she left the estate office, she carried copies of the bridge accounts and the knowledge that Gideon had listened when listening cost him authority. During the following week, they worked in careful partnership. Eliza spoke with merchants whose daughters attended the academy. Gideon met ferry owners, farmers, and the master of the coaching inn. They did not agree on every detail. He wanted written promises before announcing the plan. Eliza believed people were more willing to promise after they understood how their small gifts joined a larger purpose. Their disagreements remained sharp, but they no longer ended the conversation. Margaret's lessons continued. She completed a full country dance with 2 other young women and asked whether Gideon might join a family gathering at the academy. He claimed that he knew every required figure. Margaret laughed and said knowing a pattern was not the same as dancing it. After the others left one evening, Eliza found Gideon standing in the center of the empty floor. Lamps glowed along the walls. Their light warmed the old wood and turned the tall windows into dark mirrors. He had removed his coat and placed it over a chair. Without the severe line of black cloth across his shoulders, he looked less like a duke preparing judgment and more like a man uncertain where to put his hands. Eliza selected a lively village figure. It required partners to meet, turn, separate, and cross before joining again. Gideon began too quickly. He counted every beat beneath his breath and watched his own feet as if expecting betrayal. Eliza corrected him twice. On the 3rd attempt, she stopped the music. "You may count the steps, Gideon, but you must let me choose when to move," Eliza said. It was the first time she had used his given name. He looked at her with such direct attention that the room seemed to change around them. The music began again. This time, Gideon followed the measure without forcing it. When the figure required them to release hands, he did so. When they met again, he waited for Eliza's fingers rather than closing his own first. He missed the next count because she smiled. "I believe you have discovered a flaw in my education," Gideon said. Eliza told him his education had many excellent features. Humility had simply received too little instruction. He laughed then, not politely and not for effect. The sound surprised them both. They tried the figure once more. The steps grew easier. The room smelled faintly of lamp oil, old paper, and the lavender polish Eliza used on the floorboards. Outside, carriage wheels passed along the wet street. Inside, they moved without title, committee, or audience. When the music ended, Gideon did not release her hand at once. He told her that since the assembly, every room seemed to contain the expectation that she might enter it. He had spent years arranging his life, so nothing could disturb it. Eliza had disturbed it by refusing a door. Eliza said disturbance was not the same as love. He agreed. He did not call it love. That answer pleased her more than a grand declaration would have done. It showed restraint, and perhaps respect for a feeling neither yet understood. Gideon asked whether he might kiss her. "You may, if you do not mistake it for a promise I have not made," Eliza said. He accepted the condition. The kiss was brief and careful. It carried none of the certainty Gideon used in public. His hand rested lightly at her waist, and when Eliza stepped back, he allowed the distance without reaching after her. They agreed to continue seeing one another. There would be honesty, no secret understandings, and no public announcement while the bridge dispute remained unsettled. For several days, the agreement held. Then the parents' meeting was called. The County Assembly Committee had invited families to discuss the spring program and the rumors surrounding Eliza. The meeting room was crowded. Mothers sat in the front rows, while fathers stood near the walls. Margaret attended with the Dowager Duchess. Gideon remained beside the long table at the front. Eliza planned to explain that her lessons with Margaret had been professional and that no courtship had been declared. She had written every sentence herself. Before she could begin, Sir Bernard Cole asked whether an instructor surrounded by scandal should continue guiding unmarried daughters. Another gentleman suggested that Eliza's association with Ravensmere had made ordinary professional boundaries impossible. Gideon's expression hardened. He rose and announced that the matter was settled. Eliza would direct the spring assembly under his personal patronage. Her position would be recognized by every family wishing to attend. He declared that any insult to her professional standing would be treated as an insult to Ravensmere. Applause broke out from several rows. Others whispered. Eliza felt the floor disappear beneath her. Gideon had meant to defend her. Instead, he had placed her beneath his name before the entire county. The parents no longer saw an independent instructor. They saw a woman whose position existed because a duke had announced it. She stood. "You defended my name by taking it out of my hands," Eliza said. The applause stopped. Gideon turned toward her. For one terrible moment, he looked confused rather than guilty. He had expected gratitude because he had solved the difficulty. Eliza placed the unsigned spring commission upon the table. She said she had never accepted the position and would not do so under personal patronage. Lady Agnes stared at her as if she had rejected a crown. Margaret looked frightened. Several parents exchanged glances that would become fresh rumors before nightfall. Gideon asked Eliza to remain until they could speak privately. "No, Your Grace, not until you understand why," Eliza said. She left the room without hurrying. At the academy, Eliza extinguished every lamp except the one in her office. She returned the spring commission to its envelope and began writing a list of fees that might need to be repaid. Near midnight, a carriage stopped outside. Gideon entered carrying no papers and wearing no coat despite the cold. He looked across the darkened floor toward Eliza. Then he said he had come to ask her to become his wife. The academy was cold enough for Gideon's breath to show in the dim light. He had come without his greatcoat, as though the thought of delay had been more troubling than the winter air. Eliza remained behind her office desk. The unopened spring commission lay between them. Gideon did not speak of affection first. He spoke of protection. Marriage would end the whispers. No parent would dare call the Duchess of Ravensmere unfit to teach. The academy could remain open under her direction, or it could move to a larger building on his estate. Her income would be secured. Margaret's place beside her would be unquestioned. Whitcomb could no longer injure her without attacking the Ravensmere family. Every sentence was orderly. Every problem had an answer. "Marry me, Eliza, and no one will have the power to diminish you again," Gideon said. The proposal might have sounded noble in another room. Here, among the music books and worn floorboards Eliza had fought to preserve, it sounded like another announcement about the shape her life should take. She asked whether he had come because he wanted her as his wife, or because marriage was the strongest defense he could offer. Gideon looked toward the darkened dance floor. He admitted that he wanted her near him. He thought of her when she was absent. He trusted her judgment more than that of any person he knew. He desired her, admired her, and could promise loyalty for the rest of his life. Eliza listened for the one word he avoided. "Do you love me?" Eliza said. Silence settled between them. The lamp flame moved in a thin current of air from beneath the door. Gideon's face became guarded. He said love had caused nothing but disorder in the marriage he had known best. His parents had broken promises, injured one another, and called each return proof of great feeling. He could promise duty because duty had rules. He could promise truth because truth could be tested. Love seemed to him a dangerous claim made when reason had failed. "I do not trust love, but I trust what I can give you," Gideon said. Eliza understood then that he had not crossed the county to offer his heart. He had come to provide a permanent arrangement for a difficulty he had helped create. Her late husband had also offered comfort, position, and protection. He had not intended cruelty. He had simply believed that his care gave him the right to decide which parts of Eliza should remain visible. Gideon had listened to her history. He had been moved by it. Yet when pressure rose, he had repeated the injury in a grander form. Eliza moved from behind the desk. She stood close enough to see the cold reddening his hands. "I would rather lose every pupil than become your honorable answer to a problem you created," Eliza said. Pain crossed his face before discipline concealed it. He did not accuse her of pride or ingratitude. He asked whether there was any form of proposal she could accept. Eliza said no proposal could repair what had happened that evening. She needed him to understand that marriage was not permission to place her beneath his judgment. Until he understood, a title would only make resistance harder. She told him the academy would close at the end of the week. The remaining fees would be returned. She would stay with a widowed cousin in Bath until she decided where to begin again. Gideon's hand tightened at his side. For a moment, Eliza expected him to use the full weight of his position. He could have offered the building's owner twice its value. He could have asked Margaret to plead. He could have filled the academy with new pupils through command alone. Instead, he bowed. He left the same way he had entered, without his coat and without certainty. The next morning, Eliza began packing her father's music folios. The oldest volumes smelled of dust, chalk, and the faint lavender oil he had used to preserve their bindings. His notes remained in the margins. Some marked changes in the figures. Others reminded nervous pupils to breathe, smile, and begin again. Eliza placed each volume into a wooden case. She had completed 2 shelves when Gideon arrived. This time, he waited outside until the maid asked whether Eliza would receive him. She allowed him to enter. He carried a folded statement and a bundle of clean packing cloths. He placed the statement on the desk, but did not ask her to read it at once. Then he removed his gloves and began wrapping the heaviest folios. They worked in silence. The quiet was not comfortable, but it was honest. Gideon did not ask where she would live in Bath or how long she would remain. He did not tell her that leaving was foolish. When the first case was full, Eliza read the statement. Gideon had written that Mrs. Bellamy had never accepted the spring appointment. He admitted that he had used her name without permission and that his public defense had damaged the independence he meant to protect. He confirmed that the spring assembly would be governed by an elected committee rather than his personal patronage. He had signed the statement and sent copies to every family present at the meeting. Eliza read it twice. Gideon folded another length of cloth around a music book. His hands moved more carefully than they had during the rain-bound supper. "I will not stop you from leaving, though every selfish part of me wishes to try," Gideon said. The restraint in the words hurt more than another proposal might have done. He told her that he had ended the marriage discussions with Whitcomb that morning. He would seek other bridge funds and accept the delay. The decision had been made before coming to the academy and did not depend upon Eliza changing her answer. She asked why. Gideon looked at the cases lined against the wall. He said Whitcomb's support now required Eliza's silence and Clara's obedience. No bridge built under those terms could be called a public good. Then he faced Eliza fully. "I have asked you to trust choices you were never allowed to make," Gideon said. He said the words without requesting forgiveness. Eliza wanted to tell him the admission mattered. She wanted to ask whether he had slept or eaten. Instead, she thanked him for the correction and continued packing. The tenderness between them did not repair the rupture. It made the separation harder because neither could pretend indifference. Gideon remained until the final case was closed. At the door, he asked whether she required anything for the journey. Eliza said she did not. He accepted the answer. 2 days later, a hired carriage carried Eliza away from Lornbridge. Rain followed the road south. It entered through a crack near the carriage door and darkened the hem of her gown. The academy keys rested in her reticule. She had left the building closed rather than surrendered, but the difference offered little comfort as the town disappeared behind wet hedges. At midday, the driver stopped at the King's Arms coaching inn to change horses. A servant approached Eliza before she entered the public room. Lord Whitcomb wished to speak with her privately. He occupied a small parlor overlooking the stable yard. Eliza considered refusing. Then she remembered the workers leaving the bridge and followed the servant upstairs. Whitcomb stood beside the fire. A document waited on the table with an ink bottle and pen. He expressed regret that matters had reached such an unfortunate point. Clara had been embarrassed. Gideon had abandoned years of sensible planning. The bridge workers and village families would now suffer because a private impulse had been mistaken for principle. Whitcomb said the damage could still be repaired. If Eliza signed the statement, he would restore the bridge funds and use his influence to protect the academy from further scandal. The document declared that Eliza had encouraged Gideon's attention, misunderstood the courtesy of the opening dance, and withdrawn from Lornbridge after recognizing her error. It also stated that no blame belonged to Gideon or the Harrow family. "Sign it, and the bridge work will resume before the week is over," Whitcomb said. Eliza looked at the pen. The offer was designed with care. It promised wages to men who needed them. It could reopen her academy and quiet the mothers who feared scandal. One signature might save every practical thing damaged by the dance. It would also turn her willing choice into shame. Eliza asked whether Clara had approved the statement. Whitcomb replied that his daughter understood her duty. The answer revealed the whole structure of his bargain. Eliza and Clara were different women placed beneath the same command. One was expected to disappear. The other was expected to marry. Eliza folded the statement and placed it inside her reticule. Whitcomb demanded its return. She said she would keep the evidence of the terms he had offered. Then she moved toward the door. "I will not purchase peace with a lie about my own choice," Eliza said. Whitcomb warned that returning to Lornbridge would destroy what remained of her reputation. Eliza answered that leaving had allowed him to control the account. She would not make that mistake again. In the stable yard, the driver was securing the fresh horses. Eliza instructed him to turn the carriage north. As she climbed inside, the innkeeper came out beneath the dripping eaves. He recognized her and mentioned that news had arrived from Ravensmere that morning. The Duke had formally ended his alliance with Whitcomb and committed his own available funds to preserving the bridge foundations. Gideon had acted before knowing whether Eliza would refuse the bargain. She sat in the cold carriage with Whitcomb's statement in her hand. For the first time, Gideon had accepted the full cost of a choice without deciding what Eliza must do in return. The carriage turned toward Lornbridge. The carriage reached Lornbridge shortly after dusk. Eliza did not return to the closed academy. She went first to the home of Mrs. Finch, whose husband owned the largest mill near the river. From there, she sent messages to the innkeeper, 2 merchants, 3 bridge workers, and every parent who had supported the academy after the assembly. By morning, Whitcomb's written bargain had passed through no hands but Eliza's own. She showed it privately to those whose judgment she trusted, then asked each person a single question: would they attend a county meeting and hear a plan that did not depend upon a marriage? The answer was not always immediate. Some feared Whitcomb's influence. Others doubted that small subscriptions could replace an aristocratic fortune, yet enough agreed to make silence impossible. The meeting was held 2 days later in Lornbridge Guildhall. The long chamber smelled of damp wool, candle smoke, and old wood. Farmers stood beside shopkeepers. Bridge workers filled the rear benches. Academy mothers sat together near the front, while Gideon and Lady Agnes occupied plain chairs at one side. Eliza noticed that Gideon had not taken the central place. Lord Whitcomb arrived with Clara and 3 gentlemen who had supported the original bridge agreement. He carried himself as though the meeting existed only to confirm what sensible men had already decided. The clerk read the bridge accounts. Without Whitcomb's contribution, the full stone crossing could not be completed before winter. Gideon's available funds would protect the foundations and preserve limited employment, but the second arch and northern approach would have to wait until spring. Whitcomb rose before the clerk could introduce Eliza's proposal. He reminded the room that his family had offered the largest private contribution. He would restore every promised pound if the committee accepted two conditions. Mrs. Bellamy must hold no position in the spring assembly, and the Duke of Ravensmere must renew his understanding with my daughter, Whitcomb said. A murmur moved through the chamber. Eliza watched Clara. The young woman sat perfectly still, but her face had lost all color. Whitcomb had spoken of her as another term in an account. Gideon began to rise. Eliza met his eyes and gave the smallest shake of her head. He remained seated. The choice mattered. 6 weeks earlier, Gideon would have taken the floor, defeated Whitcomb's argument, and left Eliza to live inside the result. Now he waited, while every person in the room looked toward her. Eliza walked to the central table. She placed Whitcomb's written statement beside the bridge accounts and explained when it had been offered. She read only the sentences that mattered. The document required her to claim that she had encouraged Gideon, misunderstood his courtesy, and left Lornbridge after admitting fault. No one interrupted. Eliza then described the opening dance. Gideon had asked. She had understood the risk. She had agreed without promise, payment, or deception. No man chose my place for me that night. I stepped onto the floor because I wished to, Eliza said. The words settled over the room with more force than a raised voice. She did not accuse Clara. She said both women had been treated as pieces in an agreement they had not created. One was expected to disappear so the other could marry. Neither arrangement deserved to be called duty. Clara stood slowly. Whitcomb turned toward her, and for a moment Eliza saw fear beneath his anger. His authority depended upon the belief that his daughter would never oppose him in public. I will not be used as the price of a bridge or a marriage, Clara said. Her voice trembled, but it did not fail. Lady Agnes looked at Clara with startled respect. Several mothers in the front row shifted closer together, as though the courage of one young woman had reached all of them. Eliza opened her account book. The mill would provide timber at cost. The coaching inn had pledged a portion of winter receipts. Ferry families would contribute labor. Merchants had promised smaller sums paid over 4 months. The bridge workers had agreed to reduced hours if employment could continue for all of them, rather than full wages for half. The plan would not finish the bridge quickly. It would preserve the work already done, maintain winter passage by ferry, and complete the northern approach in spring. Gideon rose only after Eliza finished. The Ravensmere contribution will be placed under the committee's account, with no condition of marriage, patronage, or personal loyalty, Gideon said. He handed the clerk signed papers. The estate funds could not be withdrawn because of any future disagreement involving Eliza. Whitcomb called the plan undignified. He said bridges were not built by collections taken from shop counters and kitchen jars. A bridge worker answered from the rear that Stone did not care whether a coin came from a duke or a baker. Laughter broke the tension. Whitcomb's supporters looked away. The vote was taken. The local plan passed by a clear majority. Whitcomb left before the clerk recorded the result, but Clara remained with Lady Agnes. The committee then turned to the spring assembly. Mrs. Finch nominated Eliza to direct it. Eliza asked that the vote proceed without Gideon's participation. He accepted and left the chamber until the decision was complete. The committee elected her. Eliza accepted because the position had been offered by people who understood her work, not bestowed by a man protecting his private choice. The practical victory brought no sudden peace between her and Gideon. When the hall emptied, they stood several feet apart beneath the cold light of the high windows. Too much had happened for an embrace to repair it. Gideon asked Eliza to meet him the next morning in the estate office. The bridge papers required her signature as a committee member. He promised that no other subject would be raised unless she wished it. She agreed. The following morning, every account lay open upon the table. Gideon showed her the estate contribution, the repairs that would be delayed, and the exact number of workers who could return. He did not soften the figures or decide which facts would distress her. Eliza signed the committee record. Then she asked what he expected from her now that Whitcomb had been defeated. "What will you do if I never choose you?" Eliza said. Gideon did not answer quickly. The old instinct to promise safety, wealth, or patience seemed to pass through him. He set it aside before speaking. "I will keep the bridge funds where they belong, respect your work, and regret the loss without making it your debt," Gideon said. Eliza believed him. Belief was not forgiveness, but it was no longer impossible. Gideon showed her a second document. It removed him as sole patron of the spring assembly. Future decisions would belong to the elected committee. He had also instructed his solicitor that no property connected to the academy could be purchased by Ravensmere without Eliza's written request. The action was precise because Gideon was precise. For once, he had used that quality to limit his own power rather than extend it. "I will not ask you to fit inside my courage again," Gideon said. He told her he loved her. The admission was quiet and imperfect. He did not claim that love had become safe. He said only that refusing the word had not protected either of them. It had allowed him to offer devotion while withholding the vulnerability that made devotion equal. Eliza felt the truth of it, but she did not step into his arms. Gideon's conduct had changed under great pressure. She needed to know whether it would remain changed during ordinary days. "Give me 6 weeks of honest courtship. Ask before you enter my work. Tell me difficult truths, and do not propose marriage," Eliza said. Gideon accepted without negotiation. The academy reopened 3 days later for limited lessons. Gideon did not arrange new pupils. He asked Margaret whether she wished to return, and Margaret brought 2 friends who had chosen the lessons for themselves. During the first week, Gideon visited once. He sent a note before coming and waited for an answer. During the second week, a stone delivery was delayed, he told Eliza, before deciding how the committee should respond, although he already had a solution in mind. She disagreed with him. The world did not end. They walked beside the river on clear afternoons. They spoke of ordinary things, including books, food, Margaret's growing confidence, and the difficulty Gideon still had folding music sheets. No crisis forced tenderness from them, no public audience rewarded it. When Gideon forgot and began giving instructions for the spring program, Eliza reminded him that he held 1 committee vote. He apologized before finishing the sentence. When Eliza prepared to withdraw after hearing a rumor about the academy, she stopped herself. Instead of packing a case or returning a fee, she asked Gideon whether he had heard the same account. He had. They answered it together with a simple notice approved by the committee. Neither became a different person. Gideon remained decisive, and Eliza remained cautious. The change lay in what they did with those instincts. At the end of 6 weeks, spring light entered the academy through newly repaired shutters. The room had been cleaned for the first full class of the term. Fresh chalk marked the figures on the floor, and Eliza's father's music books had returned to their shelves. A ceremonial chair had arrived from the assembly committee for Gideon's use during public lessons. It was carved, high-backed, and far too grand for the room. When Eliza entered that morning, the chair stood against the wall. Gideon waited outside the academy doors. He had arrived early but had not entered because Eliza had not yet invited him. She joined him beneath the narrow stone arch. The street smelled of bread from the bakery and damp earth from the planters beside the windows. Inside, the first pupils gathered with Margaret near the musicians' platform. Gideon told Eliza that the 6 weeks had not made him less afraid of love. They had made him understand that fear was not a reason to deny what was true. "I love you, Eliza, and I will love you whether your next answer comforts me or not," Gideon said. He did not ask for marriage. He kept the condition she had set until she chose to release him from it. Eliza looked through the open doorway at the academy she had nearly lost. Gideon had not saved it for her. He had helped create the space in which she could save it herself. She placed her hand in his. Love is not the hand that moves you. It is the hand that waits until you choose to take it, Eliza said. She told him he might ask again after the spring assembly. Her answer, when he did, would be yes. The pupils began to arrive in greater numbers. Gideon made no move to enter first. He stood beside Eliza until she gave the signal. Together, they opened the second door. The young women crossed the threshold before them, filling the academy with footsteps, voices, and the first clear notes of the violin. And that is where we leave Eliza and Gideon. I will confess that the moment that stayed with me was Gideon accepting 6 uncertain weeks without bargaining for a reward. It was a quiet act, but it showed how much he had changed. Sometimes, the deepest promise is simply allowing another person time to choose. Do you think Eliza was right to refuse Gideon's first proposal, even though accepting it could have protected her academy? Tell me in the comments. If these quiet stories bring you comfort, I would be glad to have you subscribe, so we can share another one soon. Thank you for keeping me company through this story. I hope the days ahead bring you kindness, honest choices, and people who respect your voice. Until the next story, take good care of yourself, and goodbye.